Hello and welcome. Today we have David Meynell, the founder of Trade LC Advisory, an advisor and consultancy online trading platform for all aspects of trade finance. He previously worked for Deutsche Bank for, over 30 years. And also from Deutsche Bank is Clarissa Dann, who is editorial director of marketing at Deutsche Bank, who previously had a long career in legal and compliance publishing. And they were both involved in the trade finance report, which we're going to be talking about in a minute, which has become required reading. And we're also going to be talking about the future of documentary credits. Welcome, Dave.
Hi, very good to be here. Thank you very much.
Welcome, Clarissa.
Hello, great to be here. Thanks a lot, Jack.
Before we talk about the documentary credits and why documentary credits are still around, I'd like to ask you a little bit about the report, because I've already praised it on CTMfile and said it's a classic. Several people have mentioned it to me already. What's the background to the report and why did you commission it? Because why would you educate the market?
Because when we were talking some years ago almost, I think we both agreed there was a general frustration that there wasn't a single source of trade finance information for students, for exporters, and for people who weren't experts. Quite a lot of people don't know why trade finance is a great form of liquidity, a great form of getting trade from A to B, and they don't understand why you would go down the trade finance route rather than just a straight loan. Is that right, Dave?
Absolutely. I think we recognised there was no succinct guide on the market that looked at the whole gamut of trade finance, not just documentary credits or supply chain or digitalisation, but everything in one smallish booklet that would be very helpful to people that work in the global trade market.
Well, I recommend it highly, and we'll come back to it later on. But let's move on to a key question really in trade finance is why documentary credits are still around. I mean, they've been around forever. So, Dave, talk us through this slide, your first slide, because, I mean, as you say, it's the lifeblood of international commerce.
Yeah, it's a very interesting question, Jack. And I think others will tell you that have been involved in trade that the death of the documentary credit has been predicted since the early 90s. And somehow or other, it's still there. As mentioned on the slide, it was described by QC back in 1977, Sir Michael Kerr, I think, as the lifeblood of international commerce. And it's been argued that a form of letter of credit has been in existence for thousands of years. You can go back to the Silk Road in Babylonian times, in Mesopotamia. Jumping forward a few thousand years, in the 17th to 19th centuries, you'd have documentary credits that function more like travellers' checks, with British banks having a virtual monopoly. Pound sterling was accepted everywhere, and London financial institutions had a big preeminence in trade finance. Then I could jump forward again to the start of the 20th century. Documentary credits were by then globally widespread, used all over the place. But as is the case today, a large number of sales were made without the support of a bank undertaking. But when we had the First World War, with traders looking for more secure risk mitigation, documentary credits often became more of a prerequisite before goods were shipped or handed over to buyers. And we've seen this happen over time and time again over time, with the risk mitigants of a documentary credit being required. Most recently, by the way, with the COVID-19 pandemic. So in essence, documentary credits mitigate risks. They provide security, they ensure settlement, they give confidence with trusted rules, such as the UCP 600. They circumvent conflicting practices. They give you a common understanding of terminology, which leads to uniformity and standardization. But above all, they allow all regions and countries to trade confidently, regardless of legal or jurisdictional issues.
So what's the key reason why documentary credits has survived for so long? What's the driver here?
Because they work. It's as simple as that. They protect both the buyer and the seller and gives the financial, and you have a trusted party in the middle, which is the bank. Now, I know banks have taken a kicking over the last 12 years since the financial crisis, but the fact is they are still trusted to a very large extent in trade finance. So they work, and there is a trusted third party in the middle.
Okay, so, but of course, and COVID-19 has proved this, we've had to digitalize far faster than we've ever done before, but digitalization had started way before COVID-19 crisis. And you summarise the position quite neatly with this slide here. Again, talk us through it and I'll ask you some questions.
Yeah, indeed. I mean, the problems in the past have been, it's estimated, I think a Boston Consulting paper, that there are around 4 billion paper documents circulating in the trade system. And a single trade finance transaction can require over 100 pages of documentation. And it can take weeks when it should take hours to process a transaction. And it was quite obvious that we needed to create a more seamless system to increase these trade flows without paper barriers and bureaucracy. Now, the COVID pandemic was actually, despite all the big downsides of this and the sad side of it, it's actually worked as a catalyst. What possibly would have taken about 3 years has happened in 3 months. Institutions have been forced to re-examine their business practices and their business continuity plans. Now, fortunately, the ICC had already prepared for some of this. We already have electronic rules, such as electronic versions of UCP, so digital transactions can already be handled. But the big problem is not the rules or the standards. It's looking at the overriding laws and regulations. Now, Untitled, as you know, the United Nations Commission on International Trade Law has produced a number of model laws on e-commerce, and governments need to adopt these. Work is ongoing on this. The ICC UK, for instance, has a digital roadmap, and we're speaking very, very frequently to the UK government. Other governments are doing the same. But that pandemic has forced this action. Our biggest problem at the moment is probably the lack of connectivity between technology platforms.
Yeah.
I'm called them digital islands, and the insufficient common digital standards. But again, this is being addressed by the International Chamber of Commerce and many other parties in trade.
The digital connectivity between the platforms is really quite serious, because you get some very sophisticated platforms being developed, but they can't actually exchange messages in a form that makes any sense. How long do you think it's going to be before we get connection between Contour and, say, Marco Polo and so on?
I think if I go back to the figures I just said, we were expecting big changes within 3 years. But this 3 months of the pandemic has forced us more quickly. I think things will start moving a lot more quickly than they have in the past. If I could give you an actual date, I'd probably earn a fortune out of it. I don't know a real date, but certainly by the end of the year, we're going to see a lot more closeness. As a kind of side issue, the ICC, again, I refer back to them, have recognised this. And rather than just look at redeveloping documentary credit rules, they are now drafting new rules called Uniform Rules for Digital Trade Transactions. We've just today finished our 3rd draft, which will be being sent out. And this is a type of set of rules that will cover everything that the likes of WeTrade, etc., are working on. There will be an overarching, we hope, set of rules that they can all use and put us on the same level.
Dave, I wondered if you could share with us your views on adoption, because we've been there before, haven't we, with other rules and other solutions, and adoption was always the problem. And there is a participation going on at the port end with the electronic bills of lading. So yeah, I'm a bit devil's advocate here. COVID is speeding things up, but where will we get to? I suppose that's asking you to be a crystal ball again.
Which is, I'll actually go back to something I've just said. The key is going to be governments and regulatory authorities being on board with this. If we get the governments and regulatory authorities on board, the rest will follow. And that's why this digital roadmap that's being produced is being advocated towards governments and asking them to adopt, for instance, the anti-trial model laws. Because that will get us there. Because that includes the likes of the electronic bills of lading.
Of course. Some governments are more ahead than others, aren't they?
Yeah, very much so. And certainly in Asia, we see a lot of this. But if I can use our own example in the UK, there is a lot of work going on in the digital world in our own country. So I know that's being replicated elsewhere. The governments themselves are waking up too.
And they're going to have to. But the other piece of this is the digital signatures. And okay, I'm sure it's part of your rules, but repeating Clarissa's question, what do you think is going to be the adoption of digital signatures? Because it seems to me that is key right across Treasury and contracts.
Yeah. It's been quite interesting over the last 3 months, looking how banks and other organisations have approached the problem of paper being stuck in one place and it can't be sent elsewhere. And a lot of banks, for instance, have brought in kind of quasi solutions which get rid of these wet ink processes, whereby digital signatures or documents are attached by email instead of being sent out by paper. We're not there yet, Jack, but in answer to your question, when will this happen? I think it's going to happen by the end of this year.
You see, that's just stunning, because in middle of last year we did another discussion on trade finance, and there were so many barriers, and they're now just disappearing.
Yeah, and they will continue to disappear. It really is this catalyst we've had for the last 3 months that's forcing things to happen. Everybody has realised that the amount of money that has been lost in 3 months is something that we can't go through again. The number of supply chains that have been completely disrupted, we can't go through that again. And at the middle of this, the problem that we are facing is the paper. It's always been the paper. And we've always known one day it would be resolved.
The other part of what's happening here is we're actually getting changes in actual business models as to how companies manage their supply chains. And we're no longer always saying just in time. The structure is now just in case. So all of a sudden, supply chains are being radically translated into new ways of working, and in fact, new locations and so on. How are these uniform trade rules going to apply to the new models that are coming through?
Well, the great thing about the rules is that they are not dependent on any technology, any platform, or any business processes. They should be agnostic of all of that. They should be an overarching set of rules that can cover any type of supply chain movements. If we restrict ourselves to any part of it or to any type of technology, then they will fail.
Absolutely, agreed entirely. So if you bring all this together, Clarissa, your report has been very well received and so on, but why should people read it, and how are they using it already?
We've had tremendous feedback from our clients. We printed, to begin with, 4,000 copies. The warehouse is empty. Every day we get emails from happy colleagues all around the world saying, our clients really like this because it helps our conversations. So we'll sit down with a client and we'll look at all the ways they can finance their business. And so trade finance is there alongside, as I said, lending, or maybe they'd go down the capital markets route and think about doing a bond or something like that. And so there is this guide that explains in quite straightforward language how it works, what the risks are, how you get your goods from A to B, how you ensure that they will turn up and that you're covered for that risk. And there hasn't been anything like that before. And I think its uniqueness has helped. There was this thing that the Americans did in 2012. It was the US Expat Gov Guide. And that wasn't bad, actually. I used to download that and swat up with that. But it was very American. And this tries to capture the sort of the various different types of trade finance around the world. So it's not just documentary credits. We've spent quite a lot of time on that. But it's things like commodity finance, export finance. We've got infrastructure. With COVID, the projects are going on. You know, there's more and more projects coming through with longer and longer terms of the loan. And how does that work? And then there's things like, you know, dealing with things like fraud. So you've got all this wonderful digitalisation all hotting up, but the fraudsters are sort of clapping their hands with glee, thinking, yippee, I can get in there. So how does that all work? So we explain all that too. So we're printing another 4,000.
Oh, congratulations on the extra 4,000. But who in the corporate treasury department is it for? Just the treasurer or the operations manager? Who's it for?
It's actually for not only the treasurer and the CFO. A CFO of a smaller company rather than a sort of AAA, great big MNC would still find this interesting. That's what they've been telling us. And they're also using it to train up their new people coming in. People, you know, they do hire. They hire in from banks, they hire in from accountancy firms into the treasury departments, and they use it as part of their training routine.
That doesn't surprise me. Dave, what is the key takeaway from the documentary credit story? What's going to happen next?
It's a very good question. The technology moves forward ever faster, as we all know. And we're looking now at things such as artificial intelligence and machine learning, tools that have been out there in other industries for a long time, but it's now moving into the trade world and specifically into the big paper-intensive side of documentary credits. Documentary checking and examination of the documentary credits has always been considered as an art, not a science. I think the cruciality now is to reverse this. It becomes a science so we can use artificial intelligence and machine learning. So on the specific subject of documentary credits, that's where the key is for me.
So they're not going to disappear. They're going to be digitalized and rationalized with these new rules and so on, but they'll still basically be around.
They'll be around for the pure and simple reason that they are a fantastic risk mitigant.
The other thing I wanted to add, following on from your earlier question, Jack, of why we did it, we're rather old at this bank. We're 150, and it's our big birthday this year. It wouldn't be the only big birthday that's been slightly less noisy because of COVID, but it's kind of a birthday present from us to the industry. There's no charge for this. People download it. Our clients ask us to send it to them, and we do that as well. But it's kind of a happy birthday present.
Well, I think the birthday present has been very well received. Thank you both.
Thank you, Jack.
Thank you, Jack.